back to Good Morning Tobago on Tobago Updates. Viewers, we are switching gears now to that of crime. Of course, it continues to be something that weighs heavy on the minds of all of our citizens. And one group of people is doing something to perhaps, figure out a way forward in terms of how do we treat with crime. And I'm talking about the People's Roundtable on Trinidad and Tobago's crime search. So to speak about this, I am being joined by Mr. David Abdulah, who is part of this movement. Good morning and welcome to you.
Good morning, Ms. Jackson. Thank you for having me, and good morning, Tobago, and good morning, Tobago.
Certainly. First of all, tell me about the People's Roundtable on TNT's crime search.
Right. So last year, sometime around May, we began discussions with a number of civil society organizations to start a conversation about issues affecting people in Trinidad and Tobago. And coming out of those conversations, there was an agreement to form what we are now calling the People's Roundtable. And we then decided in November, we made an announcement in late November that the first public activity that we would have is what we call the Civil Society Crime Summit. Initially, it was scheduled for the 9th of January, but we had to push that back because that was actually the date of the state funeral for former Prime Minister Mr. Pandey. So this Civil Society Crime Summit was held on the 31st of January, and we had just over 100 people from about 30 organizations taking part. And it was a very participatory process because this is not a political platform and, statements that will get sound bites and headlines that look popular and vote catching. This is really about a serious conversation amongst civil society organizations. And so, apart from having some major presentations, the lead one of which was done by Professor Rhoda Reddock, and we had people like Miss Michelle Solomon Bach, who is the Deputy Director of the Police Complaints Authority, Mr. Wayne Haid, Calypsonian and a former UN head of discipline, and others, Pastor Clive Dottin, Mr. Issa Mohammed from Project 600, Miss Marva Logan, who runs of NGO in Enterprise. So we had a variety of persons presenting, and then from there we went into simultaneous roundtables or working groups, if you wish, each of which was looking at a specific topic. Education was one, gender-based violence another one, family life a third one, corruption and white-collar crime, the issue of rebuilding communities, how crime impacts on businesses and investment, including the agricultural sector and farmers. So we had 9 of these working groups, and the working groups then produced reports. All of this took place on the morning into the early afternoon of the 31st, and we are now summarizing those reports into this final document, but the outcomes of our activity, which we are then going to take back into communities to get their inputs, because what was said on the 31st may not be gospel. People may disagree. Some may agree. What people want to add to it so that it becomes really a grassroots document addressing not only analysis of the problems, but really what has to be done and by whom.
Now, let's help to put this into context a little bit. Is this to create a legislation? Is it to enhance existing legislation? What is the goal at the end of it?
Well, several things. I mean, coming out of the reports, there are recommendations that go to the issue of reforming our education system, for example, because the education system is not doing well in terms of our young people. 40-50% of our young people don't pass SCA, don't then pass or get 5 subjects at CSEC. So there's something that has to be dealt with in education. And that's not necessarily legislative, that is policy. And on the other hand, there are recommendations to have constitutional reform and other legislative changes to how the criminal justice system works. Some are administrative in terms of how the police service functions or how the prison service functions. So there are different things that can be done. Some will have to be economic and financial in terms of resources into communities, involving society generally in terms of having people engaged in mentoring young people. And so there's a variety of actions that have to be taken coming out of the discussions that we had in the Civil Society Crime Summit.
Do you feel confident that it will make a difference?
I feel confident that we can build popular support around the ideas and proposals that came out of this discussion. Some of them are not new. And one of the things that was identified was that, there have been studies done, committees set up by successive governments over 20, 30 years dealing with some of the root causes of our problems. And nothing has been done to implement some of those things. So an entire generation has come and therefore we are reaping the whirlwind of inaction and over the years. And that was one of the things that emerged from the crime summit. So what we really need to do, given our system of governance where those who have economic power, political power, really don't act unless they're forced to act, that building a grassroots movement, because the slogan of the People's Roundtable is building power from the grassroots. So if we can do that and build enough citizen involvement and action, that could push the decision makers in the right direction. I'm hopeful that we could build that kind of momentum. Of course, with the support of the media, as you're doing this morning, which we appreciate.
Certainly. Now, one of the things that you mentioned is the issue that we've had historically of implementation. Is this process coming up with ideas that we could enhance or make implementation of existing laws and policies even stronger?
Well, part of the issue of implementation, I would say there are two aspects: the failure to implement. One is, well, three. One is a culture in our society where we are good at talking and not necessarily good at getting things done. So that's a problem. So that culture has to change. There's a second aspect, which is the absence of political will. And that could only be changed by pressure from below to force those who sit down and basically make decisions at the speed of molasses flowing. In other words, slow or not at all. And the third aspect of it is ultimately getting constitutional reform to ensure that decision makers are accountable and that they do the things that are supposed to be done in the interest of the people. Now, the constitutional reform part, there is a constitution reform committee, and we will see what comes out of that. I'm not that hopeful that we're going to get significant constitutional reform in the short term, but at least it's back on the agenda. It's back on the stove, if you wish, of issues, as is Tobago autonomy. Where that goes, of course, I don't know either, but at least it's back on the table, back on the agenda. The issue of, therefore, getting implementation, I think the key to that is for civil society, citizens' involvement, pushing those who are in positions of decision making, of authority or power or office, to do what is necessary in a timely and quick manner.
How is Tobago being involved in these discussions as well?
Key question. So when we started, we did reach out to Tobago CivilNet. And so at our first press conference in October, when we announced, October 24th, when we announced the establishment of the People's Roundtable, Tobago CivilNet was a participating member. Subsequent to that, however, Tobago CivilNet felt, and we respect that totally, the Tobago CivilNet felt that they needed to focus on Tobago and the work that they're doing in Tobago, which is similar to the work of the Roundtable of bringing civil society organizations and people together in Tobago to address issues particular to the people in Tobago, to Tobagonians. And therefore they felt they could not stretch themselves or overstretch themselves by being involved in the People's Roundtable and doing the work of Tobago CivilNet. So we continue to maintain relationship of mutual collaboration and sharing information and so on. But Tobago CivilNet is not now a participating member in the People's Roundtable, and therefore when we first made our announcement in November that we would have this crime summit, in fact the name crime summit came out of a proposal from Tobago. That name came there, so Tobago had ownership of that name in that sense. But we initially said we were going to have two civil society crime summits, one in Trinidad and then one in Tobago. But the Tobago one obviously is not going to happen. Tobago CivilNet and others in Tobago, people in Tobago will organize their own process discussing crime and violence in Tobago and involving stakeholders in Tobago. But we share information and we therefore collaborate and work together.
And how is the Tobago situation being treated? Because, of course, we know the crime in Tobago is a little bit different from crime in Trinidad. I mean, there's cultural differences and that sort of thing. So, is this being considered as you are looking at a plan of action for the country as a whole?
Well, there's certain things that obviously, in terms of the recommendations, would be generic to the whole country. If, for example, you're dealing with white collar crime and corruption, then legislation or actions to deal with that, you can't be island specific. That has to be generic in terms of either legislation. For example, the Financial Intelligence Unit is a unit of the Ministry of Finance. The recommendation may very well be that it should be a standalone unit with investigative powers, so it doesn't only collect information about suspicious transactions totaling billions of dollars a year, but can investigate that and get evidence to the point of prosecution. That would be something that would be beneficial to everybody. The issue of how do we go about reforming the education system, certainly the children in Tobago are also having difficulties with respect to our education system, and because a lot of the young people and children who do not necessarily do well coming out of SEA and so on are also from Tobago. So there are some issues that would be across the board. If we're talking about community revitalization and working communities, then that might be more specific in many cases to the urban communities in Trinidad, more so than Tobago, given that Tobago is a different community where people know one another and so on and so on, and there are many family connections, which is very different, both in terms of culture and history and sociology and everything else, to that of, say, urban Trinidad. So yes, our recommendations would be general, but we're going to share this with our friends in Tobago, and they can make use of it as they see fit and add to it if they wish, and that would be great.
People follow the process?
Sorry, just say that.
How can people follow up on the progress of the document?
Right. So, yes. So, we do have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and we will be posting up the documentation there. We may have to create a website because, trust me, the documentation is huge. This is just one snapshot of part of one of the working group's reports, and we're going to do that as a matrix. So it's going to be difficult to put that up on Facebook. So we may have to create a website where the documentation is more easily accessible. But there is an email that people could contact us on, and that's peoplesroundtable.tt@gmail.com. And we do have as well a phone number, if I could just locate it in a moment, which I don't remember off the top of my head. So I'm going to have to locate that phone number in a little while and give it to you. But the People's Roundtable, right, phone number is 491-4359. That's also WhatsApp and phone. And we did put up on the YouTube the recorded presentations of the first part of our Civil Society Crime Summit, and so that is also available on the People's Roundtable YouTube channel. So which you probably, if you Google it, you should be able to locate it.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Abdulah. And viewers, of course, you can follow up on this process as well and see how you can be part of the change that we so desperately need here in Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you, Mr. Abdulah.
Thank you for having me, and look forward to another conversation when we issue the final report.
Certainly. Definitely looking forward to that. All right, viewers, so you got to go for a quick break, but we'll be right back right after this. It's a brand new morning, rise up to a brand new